Welcome to the Proceedings podcast. I'm Bill Hamblet, the editor-in-chief of Proceedings at the U.S. Naval Institute. Today is Monday, February 5th here in the Annapolis area, but it's Tuesday, February 6th in Japan, where our guests are. More on that in a minute. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Booz Allen. Accelerate today's missions with tomorrow's technologies. As the leader in providing AI solutions to the federal government and one of the world's largest cybersecurity providers, Booz Allen advances game-changing capabilities rapidly, ethically, and securely. Learn more at boozallen.com/defense. All right, so on to the show today. We're going to talk about the Navy Reserve and some big changes that have been made to how the Navy Reserve integrates with and supports the active component. So my guests joining me from Yokosuka, Japan, are Captain K.C. Chhipwadia. He's the commanding officer of the Naval Reserve for Commander Naval Forces Japan headquarters. And Commander Alison Maruca is the public affairs officer for that headquarters Navy Reserve unit at CNFJ. KC and Ali, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Hi, Bill.
How are things in Japan? That's great to have you. How are things in Japan?
They're great. They're a little wet and cold today. We were supposed to get snow last night, but we are here and we're busy working hard supporting the exercise that's ongoing.
Yeah, so you're doing a big exercise called Keen Edge, which we'll hear more about that. But let's start, Captain Chhipwadia. I want to talk about the Navy Reserve fighting instructions, and we talked to your boss's boss, the commander of Navy Reserve, maybe a year and a half ago or so, and he talked about those a little bit. But for our listeners and viewers who maybe haven't heard that episode of the podcast, what are the Navy Reserve fighting instructions? When were they published, and how have they changed the Navy Reserve?
Thank you. This is an excellent question. It's exciting times actually for the Navy Reserve. The original Navy Reserve fighting instructions were published in 2020. Admiral Mustin, think of it as a sense of a battle order cry that he was directed from CNO to realign and refine and fix, and ultimately to improve how the reserve forces across all of reserve forces are training, are structured, our reserve unit structures, as well as our manpower. Or do we have the right people at the right place at the right time? So it was a broad battle order that he directed his staff to get after this problem set, and he created 4 two-star-led efforts to design the force, train the force, develop the force, and mobilize the force. So 4 key areas to really get after this problem set across the entire Navy Reserve, and it's an exciting time to have clear purpose, which is very clear from Admiral Mustin. There's no confusion of his direction to his reserve force, which is his number one priorities. All of that is to get after warfighter readiness.
And it sounds like your unit out there in Japan, and you're participating in this exercise called Keen Edge. And it sounds like the work that you're doing, that your unit, your personnel are doing in this exercise right now is very much in support of or in accordance with those Navy Reserve fighting instructions. I got to point out, in January, we published a Proceedings article by Commander Maruca. It's titled Navy Reservists in the Pacific, Rehearsing to Mobilize for a Maritime Conflict. And for our non-reservist viewers and listeners, if you haven't been exposed to the Navy Reserve recently, I think you should read it because it's really eye-opening. And my big takeaway from it was that today's Navy Reserve is not your father's or your mother's Navy Reserve, right? So those of us who came in the Cold War and perhaps were used to reservists coming in on weekends at the gaining command and perhaps moving your pencils around and that sort of thing when they did their drills. This is a very different structure and a very different, it sounds like a much better way of integrating the Navy Reserves into the active or the total force component. So, Ali, next question to you is, as a public affairs officer, describe, and this is in your article a little bit, there's Navy Reserve units that support active component commands in Japan, in Korea, and Singapore, kind of throughout the Pacific. How many are there?
Mm-hmm.
Big are they? How many personnel? And do they operate any differently than CONUS-based reserve units?
Yeah, thanks, Bill, for that question. Yes, I would say there's probably at least over 20 reserve units that throughout the United States that support gaining commands here in Japan, in Korea, and Singapore. And we're talking probably hundreds of sailors. We've got three main big headquarters units that support the missions out here. We've got our unit, the CNFJ Reserve Headquarters Unit, which is based out of Navy Reserve Center, Minneapolis. We have our 7th Fleet Unit, Headquarters Unit, which drills out of NRC Dallas Fort Worth. And then we have our Commander Naval Forces Korea Unit, which is based out of Port Hueneme. And then each of those headquarters units have detachments across the United States that have local opportunities for the sailors in those areas to be able to complete their Navy Reserve requirements. But we are all focused on supporting active duty commands here in the Pacific, in Japan, Korea, and Singapore. And so we all reservists have the same requirements to maintain our readiness, our training, our physical fitness. That's where our drill weekends come in, 1 weekend a month, and we perform our 2 weeks of AT, our annual training, a year. But the challenge becomes, which we'll get into in the conversation in a little bit, is when it comes time to mobilize reservists, and as Captain Chhipwadia said, refining how we mobilize to our billets, which is a direction through the Navy Reserve fighting instructions. The challenge is, how do we, the sailors who are attached to these units in the United States, mobilize in a conflict to these active duty commands that are out here potentially in contested areas. We've got folks who support billets on ships, and that logistically becomes a challenge, and a whole host of other things that we've never had to do before. And so while we all have the same requirements, regardless of where we drill, to maintain that readiness, so we maintain our warfighting readiness, it comes into play. The difference is when we mobilize, we're going straight out to the fight, but how do we get there?
Gotcha. Okay. So Captain, back to you for the next question. Can you just describe a little bit? We talked a little bit at the opening about this exercise Keen Edge that you've been in Japan for now, it sounds like for a couple of weeks. If you can tell us what the focus of the exercise is, and then how many reservists have come in from those CONUS-based units to support the active force out there in Japan and 7th Fleet.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Then overall, Keen Edge is one of just many exercises that we, CNFJ, and the other units that Ali mentioned support in this Far East area. So Keen Edge, there's Keen Sword, and then a host of others across the Department of Defense in the Far East area. We're just exercising one of them. It's a key one that certainly evaluates, assesses, and refines our processes and procedures, I would say, broadly speaking, to make sure that we can all work together. That's what all these rehearsals, if you will, are really for, is to figure out those things that the unknowns, the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns that we're trying to really resolve, because we won't know them all every time. And so we have to consistently do these reps and sets to uncover those and then quickly get after solving those. So this is just one of many that my command supports throughout the year. And my focus, particularly coming back to NRFI, or the Navy Reserve Fighting Instructions, I tell my team every single month, they probably are tired of me saying it, which is we exist for one reason, and that is for warfighter readiness. It is very clear from our boss down, and if you'll read new CNO Admiral Franchetti's principles, pretty clear: warfighting, warfighter, and foundation. So I think we have pretty clear alignment across the leadership of what we really should do and why I come to the office. So every one of my sailors from the E1 up is asking themselves, why do I come into the office, and how can I get absolutely the best that I can at executing that particular function? So as a leadership, my team, we owe every sailor clear purpose of why they come to the office, what their purpose in their readiness means, so that they can, and then give them the tools to go execute that. So it's has been a phenomenal exercise so far to give my team those sets and reps. Not just the warfighting pieces, as you know, Bill, we have to get to know each other as well. And as a reservist, we don't walk down the hallway and to be able to see every sailor every single day. We don't wear the uniform every day. And so that presents another layer of challenge that these exercises give us an opportunity to break some bread across our shipmates and get to know that, because that's how we can smooth out a lot of these wrinkles, if you will.
So sort of follow-on question, just manpower, manning. How's manning in the Navy Reserves right now? Because the Navy made big news last week by saying that it would start accepting enlistees who had not graduated from high school or didn't have a GED. And so a lot of people, there's some hand wringing about that. So just kind of curious, what are you seeing in the reserve component in terms of manpower and the fit and fill in your units?
Yeah, excellent. I would, oddly enough, across the Navy, we certainly have those challenges that resulted in what you saw and read last week of try and find ways to meet our recruiting goals. But, I will tell you, Bill, that at the reserve side, and particularly in my unit in Enterprise across CNFJ, we have over 170 sailors across the reserve, my CNFJ Reserve Enterprise. Our manning is actually pretty good. It's on high numbers, over 90%, because I'm just grateful that we have sailors who recognize and appreciate that when they come to CNFJ in the Far East, this is where the pacing threat is. That's no surprise to anybody. This is where, if you want to find yourself, sink your teeth into a meaningful problem set and be incredibly valued, this is where you come. And it is, I'm appreciative that both CNR, CNO, PACOM Commander and PAC Fleet all recognize where this is where the shift in the priorities, and our sailors are, quite frankly, our reserve sailors are coming to the call. So I'm actually very grateful that we have incredible manning and within our enterprise.
Oh, that's good news. Good news. And do they feel, well, not how they feel. Do you feel for back when your sailors and your officers are back home in CONUS and they're drilling and doing their 2 weeks and their weekends a month, do they have connectivity with the gaining command so that they understand what is going to be expected of them when they come out for a big exercise like Keen Edge, or if they get mobilized for a real world contingency?
Yeah, we absolutely have connectivity. What we have done, though, I would say, is that because the action component has many problems they're solving every day, the real world problems, it is our leadership, my job and my leadership team's job to design a system, an integration system that minimizes active component, what I use as calories burning. We need to save those calories for warfighting piece, so that my team can say, we will create a way that communicates to our sailors. We keep them plugged in. We do our monthly warfighter training in Minneapolis or in Fort Worth or in Yokosuka, wherever my detachments are. And for every major exercise, such as Keen Edge, I actually assign a leadership team that is designed simply to manage, organize, and execute on behalf of the reserve forces. So we have clear communications all the way down to the E1 of what their expectations are, leading all the way up. So it just reduces the strayed electrons that can certainly amplify if there's no clear leader. So I assign a leader and a leadership team that ensures that we have what we call, as you certainly know, RSO&I, the reception and onward staging piece, so that we can plug right in. And as CNR says, our task is plug in, be ready on day one.
Gotcha. So Ali, well, go ahead. You go ahead, and I've got a question for you.
Yeah, no, I just want to add too, I think in today's digital age, I think across the reserve force, we have better connectivity with our gaining command, whether we're in the States and we support a command in the Pacific, or we're in the States and we support a command in Norfolk. The technology that we have now allows greater accessibility than ever before. And so there is a much, it's something that every unit continues to work on, but the closeness and the ACRC integration, which is a term that we use a lot, is stronger than ever before, because we just have the capabilities and the platforms to maintain it, as opposed to 5-10 years ago even. So
Got it. So active component, reserve component, ACRC there. And yeah, you've got connectivity. And do your folks feel like they've gone through the right A schools and C schools and they understand what's expected of them when they get out to the gaining command? The training is applicable enough. It is it's like plug and play kind of thing.
That's right. And to that point, Bill, actually, sorry, part of that, when I started off with the 4 major lines of effort that Admiral Mustin established to train the force, was also a key piece that trickles down to all of us to say what the limited time that we spend as reservists, 16 hours a week, weekend and a month, if you think of that, every hour matters. How do we efficiently and effectively utilize that time to get after the warfighter piece, which is number one, but as a professional organization, we have careers to manage and help our sailors. So we have to balance all of that, and which makes it challenging, of course. But as CNR says all the time, is hard is authorized.
Hard is authorized. I like that one. So, Allie, in your article, you wrote, I'll read this quote. For 20 years, the wars in the Middle East mobilized seagoing sailors to ground-based billets. And as a result, the systems and processes are not optimized to rapidly mobilize sailors to the Pacific theater in response to a maritime mission. Just pull that apart for us, if you would.
Yeah, sure. So over the past 20 years, we've been supporting the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and continuously refining those processes where, sailors would go to a collection point here in the States for their training, and they'd get issued their gear and they'd get prepared. And then they'd get on a flight and they'd go into the next staging area where they do follow-on training and get whatever specific gear then that they would need to take forward into theater. And so it was a very calculated, planned out process that went into a ground environment where, and that culture and those systems and that institutional knowledge was built over the course of the last 2 decades. But now as we shift and focus on what it would look like in a maritime conflict, and we look at it from the CNFJ perspective and all the other folks who support Pacific commands, we're putting folks much further away without the staging capabilities necessarily, and potentially people on ships in contested theaters. We just don't have the foundation because it's a wildly different scenario than what we've been doing for the past 20 years. And so that's what Captain Chhipwadia and the COs of the other major units that support the Pacific are working through, as well as representatives from Commander Navy Reserve Force, to figure out how do we, when the president mobilizes sailors in response to a wartime conflict, and that means we mobilize to Japan, how do we walk through those processes as expeditiously and efficiently as possible so that we can get out there to the fight to support our gaining command?
Yeah, and if I could just add a little bit of maybe context for that, for folks who haven't been following along closely with the Navy Reserve contributions to the global war on terror after 9/11, but obviously those were predominantly ground fights, and the Navy put forward a lot of individual augmentees, IAs, right? And they went forward and they supported, so we're talking Navy sailors that went forward and supported Army units or supported Marine Corps units or supported international coalition forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. And as you said, I had some sailors when I was on sea duty at Cargo 4 back in the mid 2000s, and we would get this tax. We would be told, hey, you got to send X number of sailors, and they're going for 6 months or 9 months or a year, and then they would go to a big Army command, and they would get training, and then they would be flown forward, and so that I think. Contextually, you're right. This was a much, this was big green, big Army machine that the Navy fed people into, but at a very individualized basis. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't, I think the term that Admiral Mustin used to us was mob to billet. If I'm correct me if I'm wrong there, but mobilizing sailors to specific Navy billets that are identified forward in 5th Fleet and 7th Fleet and places like USFK and CNFJ. Did I get that right?
Absolutely. No, you hit the nail on the head right there, Bill. So.
Well, good. Well, I mean, it sounds like, after we talked to Admiral Mustin, that was almost 2 years ago now, and he was describing some of these efforts to get after these problems. And it sounds like from your perspective that a lot of progress has been made, which I think is, commendable. So, Captain Chhipwadia, you've commanded, by my count, when I read your bio, 5 Navy Reserve units. You've served in a bunch of others in a 25-year career. Can you just describe some of the changes in the Navy Reserve that you've seen during that career, and what excites you most?
Yeah, thank you, Bill. I will tell you that serving, of course, wearing the uniform for all of us is exciting in general. That's why I get up in the morning and why I sign the dotted line that bonds us all together, no matter what race, religion, creed, and MOS and designator background you have. Is that one common bond is that I will defend and, if necessary, die for my nation. And I will say that at the lowest level, at the sailor level, the rank and file is important to ensure that they know why they come to work, why do they wear the uniform, and what will make them completely ready. In my career span, we always understand that we are here to defend should the nation require, but that's very hot. That's at the 50,000 foot level. How do you translate that down to the sailor, and what does that really mean? And quite frankly, there was struggling. What do we feel? We were caught in this game of active component manning shortages, or someone goes on vacation or leave. And so we were regularly sort of gap filling, what we call gap filling. And it may not be what your background is. There certainly wasn't the mob to billet that you mentioned. That is a key piece of the fighting instructions, is mob to billet. And as we come back, I would say that the most significant change that also connects to your other question of what excites me is purpose. There's lots of things happening across the world. There's stray voltage everywhere. There's noise. There's chaos. And so I'd like to simplify, and that's difficult. And how do you simplify something? It's just tell me what the vision and purpose is very clearly. And I will tell you that I'm incredibly excited and grateful that Admiral Mustin there's no confusion. You cannot walk away with a scratching your head saying, I really don't know what the boss meant. It was very clear. Everything we do must pass the smell right, taste right test of, does this improve my warfighting readiness as an individual and as a collective team? And that's what we owe every commander out across. And in my case, very grateful that I will tell you that Commander Naval Forces Japan, Admiral Lati, is 1,000% behind Admiral Mustin, recognizing the value of what this will bring to him, because that's ultimately who we support in a wartime scenario. So the change, I would say, in the simplest way, is really this drive towards singular focus, warfighting, and everything we do, we must ask ourselves, does this align to warfighting readiness from a training, a unit structure perspective, a career development perspective? Does it help me with warfighter readiness? And that is actually, I am incredibly excited about that, because I know I can take that guidance and develop a plan with my team and execute that. And I can translate that down to the rank and file, which I believe is ultimately who will win this war, is the rank and file.
Oh, that's great. So I got another question for both of you, and I'll start with Ali on this one. As reserve professionals, what message would you like to share with active duty naval officers and enlisted professionals about the reserve force?
The thing that always comes back to my mind is that we are one team, one fight, one total Navy force. And it's hard to welcome others sometimes into your world, especially when we're not here every single day, walking the halls, like Captain Chhipwadia said. But reservists often bring unique experience and skill sets to the fight that we want to leverage. that goes, beyond what we do every day in the Navy. And so we are here to be one team, and we're working hard. And I would say over the course of my not quite as many years as Captain Chhipwadia career, but I'm getting there. Over the course of my career in the reserves, I've seen a significant transformation of the teamwork and the acceptance between the active duty and the reserve counterparts. And we have to continue to maintain that one team, one fight mentality, one total Navy force as we continue to train and prepare to, when called upon, and we need to get our butts in seats and man the watch floor or whatever it is to, our mobilization billet, so that we can win the war together. So,
yeah, Captain, before you go, I'm going to make a plug, because as an active duty guy, I was probably in the minority for part of my career as a fan of the Navy Reserve. And I'll share a story. When I was out at the U.S. Pacific Command, now Indo-Pacific Command, and I led the China intel team there at the Joint Intelligence Operations Center. The reserve unit that supported my team was in Denver. It was the Joint Reserve Unit in Denver. And one of the things, they really understood what we were all about and what our requirements were and how to support us. But we also, on the active side, we invested heavily in that Joint Reserve Unit, because we spent it was in the millions of dollars just before I got to Hawaii in the mid 2000s to provide high-speed secure communications at the TSSCI level. And the reserve unit there, they had the same imagery interpretation systems and capabilities that we had out in Hawaii. And so the intel specialists that would come in on the weekends, they were looking at the same problem set that we were looking at on a daily basis. And so they were plugged into, they could do imagery interpretation. We could leave stuff for them on a Friday. We'd come back on a Monday and they'd have it done for us. Or they could, if they plugged in for a 2-week AT, either there or in Hawaii, they knew our photo interpreters, our ISs, and they could do the job right along with us. And same thing for other skill sets in the intelligence community, which was just incredibly powerful. But I think it's always been incumbent on the active component to be, as you said, real clear. What's the vision? What's the mission? Communicate, but also to set the reservists up with the tools that allow them to be, contributors on day one when they show up. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now, but I'm a huge fan of the reserves. They were incredibly supportive to my team in Hawaii. And sometimes when I hear people grumble about the reserves, I go, yeah, you're going off of like a 1970s mentality, I think there. So all right. So now I'll let you answer my question now that I'm done with my soapbox.
No, thank you for sharing that. I couldn't do better if you didn't pay me for this, because you exactly said some things that I was going to share, a different lens from what Commander Maruca shared, which you hit on, and that's number one, investment. I love that word that you use. CNR is incredibly focused. He has made substantial investment in capital, in human capital, in financial capital to get after the warfighting. It's not just a low bumper sticker. He's literally making decisions to divest, and he has over the last few years, to divest in areas that aren't aligned to warfighting. They may be interesting and nice to do, but there's a lot of interesting things. But really getting after the investment piece to owe that to the fleet commanders, to every commander. And the other piece to add on to Commander Maruca, which is relationships. It's a two-way street. We really do want to be ready. We really do want to contribute to the mission. We're not an outsider, but I will tell you that in my long career, and to your point, AC-RC relationships are a challenge. They have been challenges. We are human at the end of the day, and there are challenges of why do you're a distraction to me in some cases, but it's the mindset piece. If we all align on mindset and recognize we really do want to contribute, we have to take time to build those relationships. So my continued ask, I ask my team, I always look in the mirror first, is what can we do to smooth and improve that relationship. There's a great An outstanding quote that my team hears me say all the time from General Mattis is vicious harmony. His quote is, you can have 1,000 PhDs, the smartest person in the world. I don't want to work with you because if you aren't focused on creating vicious harmony across a staff, you're no good to me. You're really no good to me. So I love that, and I use that to my team. Is we've got to create vicious harmony, break bread across the aisle, if you will, from the AC, the RC, and within our enterprise. Without those relationships, the rest will be all barriers. We got to remove those barriers, and they're there. So that's what we're focused on.
All right, I love it. Are there any? Do you have any saved rounds or any questions that I should have asked you that I wasn't smart enough to ask?
You nailed it.
Yep. No.
Oh, I will. So one more. I'm sorry. I do have a plug.
Okay.
And forgive me if I accidentally don't remember if I did, but if I did, General Mattis, of course, is who I was referring to. I don't know if I said that name correctly. But the one plug I have at the end there is connected to the act components relationship piece, and a little bit to what you said earlier is every sailor is a recruiter, and so it's important to know that we want to value your time as an active component. Should you decide as a family decision or a personal decision to leave the active component, we would really love to have you. We want to make sure we retain that talent, allow you to go fulfill and achieve your civilian goals, whatever they may be, but that we would love for you to continue to wear that uniform, continue to serve in a reserve capacity. So don't think of us as a Navy as a one and done. We would absolutely love to bring you and keep you in the fight if that's an option for you.
No, that's a great plug, and I'll make a plug because I suspect that there'll be more than an average number of reservists watching this episode of the podcast, and so my plug is for you to write for proceedings. We do get quite a few reservists, including Commander Maruca has written for us a number of times. But if you have an idea for this topic, ACRC integration, write for us. If you have an idea for any other topic, from warfighting to leadership to tactics to strategy, we'd love to have your voice in the pages of proceedings. And oftentimes it leads to a podcast. So you're pushing on an open door to write for us and to be part of the open forum of the Naval Institute.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we're about out of time, and it is late tonight. So I'm going to specifically thank our producer Heather Legg, who's staying up extra late so that we can do a late Monday night, early Tuesday morning thing. And thank you for joining us also early on your Tuesday morning there in Japan. My guests today have been Captain Casey Chhipwadia and Commander Ali Maruca. They're joining us from Yokosuka, Japan, and they are part of the Reserve, the Navy Reserve, and the Reserve component, and they're out there doing operation or exercise Keen Edge out in the forward deployed naval forces, keeping the world safe for democracy and freedom and all kinds of alliances and partners and all the important stuff. So great to have you on the show. This was a really fun conversation, and Ali, thanks for writing for us again.
Always. Thanks, Bill.
And thank you. And on behalf of Admiral Lati, our boss, we also appreciate that. And I know he does as well. So arigato gozaimasu.
Arigato gozaimasu.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Heather.
Okay. Well, that wraps up this episode brought to you by Booz Allen. Accelerate today's missions with tomorrow's technologies. As the leader in providing AI solutions to the federal government and one of the world's largest cybersecurity providers, Booz Allen advances game-changing capabilities rapidly, ethically, and securely. Learn more at boozallen.com/defense. Next week is West, our big annual convention in San Diego, February 13, 14, 15 at the San Diego Convention Center. Admission is free to active duty military. We'll have Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Franchetti. We'll have the Secretary of the Navy, the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, the Pac Fleet Commander, and more. For details and to register, go to westconference.org. And until then, remember, victory begins at the Naval Institute.